All right, so I just wanted to look up a Bible verse real quick. It says here in Mark chapter 16, and we're going to go to verse 18. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. All right, so let's go into code talk right now real quick. They shall take up serpents. How does a serpent deliver its venom? Through two little hypodermic needle-like fangs. Is that correct? And when it bites you, it injects that poison into your skin, and you get sick and die. But under certain circumstances, God's saying here that you won't be hurt. And in fact, we read a story in the Bible about Paul taking up the serpent. He reached his hand on the fire and was bit by a serpent, and the people marveled, and they said, certainly God is not with this man, because if he were, he would not have been bit by a serpent. But then after a bit, they watched him carefully, and he didn't get sick. He didn't die. Then they said, well, God must be with this man because, he was bit by a very deadly serpent and he did not die. Paul obviously didn't go looking for that serpent. He just didn't see it on the ground and just decide to pick it up, right? He didn't intentionally. We're not going to tempt God. We're not going to presume against God's mercy. It's a bad thing to do that. But by chance, if these things happen to us, he's telling us that we'll be protected from it. In other words, imagine a missionary, for example, that needs to go into a foreign country and he needs to get bit by the serpent, right? He needs to drink that deadly thing. It might be that God will protect him from any harm that might come from that. This is kind of a minor point. What I really wanted to get into was mass formation psychosis. Now, this is something that Joe Rogan has recently spoke about, Dr. Robert Malone on there. Robert Malone kind of bounced this off of Dr. Matthias Desmet. Okay, so back in 2020 when this, he describes this phenomenon, this behavioral phenomenon stemming from all of this. And in his words, it says 4 things need to exist, all right? And we're going to look at those 4 things. He names them off here. The first thing is that there needs to be a lot of socially isolated people. Now, whenever this mass psychosis has been implemented, if you will, upon the masses, upon the people, we see this phenomenon taking place, in isolation. Let's say the Jews, they were separated, right? They were separated and they were isolated from the rest of the population. Yeah, let's take Jim Jones, for example. Here's another one. He takes his cult following and he takes them all down to South America, was able to work on them, and eventually they drank the Kool-Aid, if you will. Proverbially, many people are drinking the Kool-Aid today. The second one is that there needs to be a lot of people who experience a lack of sense-making in life. They bombard you with all of these facts, right? And many of these facts seem to defy what we know as logical, but it has to be because all of this fear that's involved with everything that's going on and the anxiety and everything else is forcing us to look for a solution. And the third and fourth condition that there needs to be is a lot of free-floating anxiety, fear, free-floating psychological discontent. So meaning anxiety and discontent that is not connected to a specific representation. So it needs to be in the mind without the people being able to connect it to something. If you have these 4 things, lack of social bonds, lack of sense-making, free-floating anxiety and free-floating psychological discontent, then society is highly at risk for the emergence of the mass phenomenon. So many others, this article points out as well, have expounded upon this sort of thing. There are lots of different examples in history of it. Is that what's taking place today? Here, the Huffington Post, let's just click on that real quick, talk about this without their perspective on things. An unfounded mass psychosis theory is being used to dismiss COVID precautions. All right. An unfounded theory taking root online suggests millions of people have been hypnotized into believing mainstream ideas about COVID-19, including steps to combat it, such as testing and vaccination. In widely shared social media posts this week, that's another thing. They were talking about how this was the number 2 thing talked about on Twitter there for a while, I guess, until Twitter shut it down, which doesn't mean anything. I'm not into those ideas that just because it's very popular at the time that there's something behind it. You be the judge of that. I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure healthy people spending hours in line to get a virus test is mass formation psychosis in action, reads one tweet that was liked more than 22,000 times. The term gained attention after it was floated by Dr. Robert Malone on the Joe Rogan. All right. That was on the December 31st podcast. Malone is a scientist who once researched mRNA technology, but is now a vocal skeptic of the COVID-19 vaccines that it used it. All right. Again, I'm on the Huffington Post here. HuffPost. Excuse me. They might be slightly different. Who knows? But psychology experts say that the concept described by Malone has no basis in evidence and is similar to theories that have long been discredited. Here's a look at the facts. Okay. The facts is the claim. The concept of mass formation psychosis explains why millions of people believe in a mainstream COVID-19 narrative and trust the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. The facts. Malone highlighted the unfounded theory on a podcast hosted by a comedian. All right, that's something that they want to point out here. And commentator Joe Rogan. During the episode, Malone cast doubt on COVID-19 vaccine safety and claimed the mass psychosis had resulted in a third of the population basically being hypnotized. Malone went on to say that the phenomenon explained Nazi Germany. Remember, we just talked about that. When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety in a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it. And then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnotists. They literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere, Malone said. He claims such people will not allow the narrative to be questioned. Crediting a professor in Belgium, Malone also said in a December blog post that this mass hypnosis explains millions of people's becoming captivated by the dominant narrative concerning the safety and effectiveness of the genetic vaccines. Psychology experts say that there is no support for the psychosis theory described by Malone. Wouldn't hurt if they put the names of those psychology experts in here, and maybe a little a link to the Science Journal. That perhaps would reinforce what they're saying. To my knowledge, there's no evidence whatsoever for this concept, said Jay Van Bavel, an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University, who recently co-authored a book on group identities. Van Bavel said he had never encountered the phrase mass formation psychosis in his years of research, nor could he find it anywhere in peer-reviewed literature. Okay, so he's making reference to some peer-reviewed literature, science journals. The concept has no academic credibility. Stephen Riker, a social psychology professor at the University of St. Andrews in UK, wrote an email to the Associated Press. The term also does not appear in the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology. I have not checked that for myself. Psychosis is a term that refers to conditions that involve some disconnect from reality. According to a National Institutes of Health estimate, about 3% of people experience some form of psychosis at some time in their lives. This idea of being detached from reality, especially when you use fear, is an easy concept to wrap your mind around. Because fear can create a psychotic behavior, if you will, a disconnect from reality. Let's just say it like that, because, when you say the word psycho conjures up all these images of mass murderers and serial killers and things like that. The description of mass formation psychosis offered by Malone resembles discredited concepts such as mob mentality and group mind. All right, according to John Drury, which of course they're going to disprove here, a social psychologist at the University of Sussex in the UK who studies collective behavior. The idea suggests that when people form part of a psychological crowd, they lose their identities and their self-control. They become suggestible and primitive instinctive impulses predominate, he said in an email. All right. That notion that has been discredited by decades of research on crowd behavior, Drury said, no respectable psychologist agrees with these ideas now. Too bad they couldn't name some names aside from this guy that they seem to find, but that's okay. Because when I'm hearing about crowd behavior, there was just a recent event where 3 or 4 people were killed when a crowd, just for some crazy reason, became panicked inside of a auditorium where there was a rock band playing. I don't know if you guys remember that. And they just started storming out of the building, and people were crushed. And they just went into a frenzy, into this uncontrollable, some of these dismissals of the definition. But that notion has been discredited by decades of research, okay? Multiple experts told the AP, that's Associated Press, for you guys that didn't know that while there is evidence that groups can shape or influence one's behaviors, and that people can and do believe falsehoods that are put forward by the leader of a group, those concepts do not involve masses experiencing psychosis or hypnosis. Really. Before the concept of mass formation psychosis took off in recent days, it had percolated online in recent months. All right, so this is Revelation 18 and verse 23. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, talking about the beast power here, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. In other words, Jesus will no longer be taught in this organization. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Okay, did you catch that? This word sorcery, I want you guys to look it up in the Strongs. The word is actually pharmakia in the Greek, and let your imaginations do the rest. Actually, you can study it. You don't have to imagine. So the great men of the earth, the merchants were the great men of the earth. Now, the word back then is merchants. Today, it would be unions, supergiant, corporate monsters. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all that were slain upon the earth. That's it for today, folks. Thanks for watching. My name is Kerry Martin. You're watching Prophecy Montana. Please give this channel a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm. It helps other people to see this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have subscribed, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being loyal to the channel. We shall see you on the next one. Thank you very much.